For 7 years I was a section commander in central Bournemouth, which has a very strong nighttime economy, and there was a lot of pressure put upon me there, not just from staffing issues but being high profile. There was a lot of media contact. The job that I was doing at the time was probably the equivalent of two people's. The local councillors were constantly on my back to clear up what I considered to be minor policing issues, and sometimes there was no end in sight to those issues. For example, they didn't like the sight of rough sleepers on the streets of Bournemouth, a very difficult issue to deal with, yet they were constantly on the telephone to me saying, what are you doing about it, why aren't you clearing this up? The pressure really was constant.
I would describe him as unapproachable at times. I didn't know where I stood. His moods would change. I was finding that I was becoming more and more tired. I was lacking energy. I was finding it increasingly difficult to string a sentence together by the middle of the week. He would react in perhaps, I don't know, an angry way or an outspoken way that was not his normal relaxed manner. I was finding that when I was coming home from work that I just wanted to withdraw from the world. I was not really engaging with my family at all. And I found that I just had to be busy all the time. I couldn't sit down and relax, even at home. It was very annoying, I know, for the family. I couldn't sit still for more than about 10 seconds. So I was off and tidying the kitchen or tidying the lounge, and I didn't realise how much that impacted on Sue. It did come to a head at one point when Neil questioned whether we would actually see ourselves to the 25th wedding anniversary, which was coming up the following year. I have to say that I thought it was a marriage breakup, and that was what we were talking about initially, that we were drawing apart and that inevitably we would split.
When I applied to go part-time, I was originally thinking of going to work in a different department, back to my old job when I was on maternity leave. However, at the last minute, I had a role change and was posted to a different area of policing. I wanted to do 3 days a week, and there was some overt pressure to work more than that, that the job as an inspector particularly required you to be in the office for at least 4 days a week. The deficit of your hours is cumulative, so if you work 30 hours a week, at week 1 you're 10 hours behind, week 2 you're 20 hours behind, and that just continues to go on and on. So after 2 or 3 months you find you're 2 or 3 weeks behind with your workload, because that workload doesn't get picked up by anybody else when you're not there. I'm doing a full-time job on 75% of my pay. When I address this sort of 8, 9, 10 weeks down the line of this deficit of work and how was I supposed to do a 40-hour week in 30 hours, it was insinuated that I should do more work at home and take more work home with me when I had to leave at 4 o'clock.
Someone actually said that to you?
Yes, yeah. They said, well, you know your priorities.
My normal role was being a response inspector, so it's a rotating 24-hour shift, mornings, afternoon, nights, basically managing the response policing for half of Worcestershire. We were deployed. The actual demonstration part, the build-up wasn't too bad. I was conscious that there was a lot of drinking, a lot of disorder going on inside the Wetherspoons public house where the EDL had assembled. Many of them, 60–70%, were clearly not there to make any sort of political point. They were there to cause and provoke violence.
There are protesters on the roofs of police vans. Bottles and cans are being thrown and police hats are being taken from them and moved. Police are now putting helmets on. They've got riot shields and they're moving in to try to contain this protest.
It all started to go wrong at the end of the official demonstration part of the event, and the plan then was that they were going to be put back on buses and either coached away from town or taken to the railway station and put on trains. That didn't happen. The containment broke down, and I found myself with my PSU being the thinnest part of the containment cordon, and this hardcore 200, 300, 400 troublemakers were just keen to get out of the town centre so that they could target and victimise the local ethnic minority population. And it was that group that stampeded over my PSU serial. As a result of that, half my officers were injured. Officers had their helmets dragged off, they got kicked, they got trampled, they got pummeled, spat at, sworn at, shouted at, abused. I had one of my sergeants was put in hospital overnight with concussion. I had another officer that was hospitalised with a dislocated shoulder. And I had officers that really were in significant pain, but didn't complain and didn't make a fuss. And I was quite proud of them, but felt very disappointed that they'd been put in that position, which was essentially a no-win situation, because the event was under-resourced, it was poorly planned, communications weren't effective, and there really wasn't a contingency for what would happen if things went wrong. You're young officers, young men and women, and you have a sense of pride and ownership in one, wanting them to do a good job and to be effective, but most of all making sure they get back in one piece. And on that occasion, although you can argue that I'm not accountable and didn't have a huge role in the decision making, I felt that I'd failed.
We have within our force a stress initiative which involved seeing a welfare officer. 2 or 3 times I said, no, I don't need to see the welfare officer, I'm very happy, I'll see this through. We eventually arranged to meet on neutral territory in a canteen, and she really brought it home to me how bad I was, and I just hadn't realised to what stage I'd become, and I was persuaded to take some time away.
It did affect me, and it affected me in a very subtle and psychological way that I don't think I recognised at the time. But I think probably a couple of months after that incident, I went PSU training. I got very frustrated during a training scenario, and I actually assaulted a couple of the officers that I was working with. And it was deeply uncharacteristic, but it was a red flag for me, and it made me realise that the effect on me was deeper than I'd really realised.
There is the thought in policing amongst women that, well, I can't get promoted because practically how am I going to work part-time at these higher ranks? The influx of women that's come in as PC level and sergeant level, a lot of them probably in their early 20s over the last 10 years, are coming to ages where they're going to want to have children, and they're also coming to ages where they want to get promotion in their careers. The community is made up of 50-50, men and women more or less, so your police should be representative of the communities, and if somebody wants to speak to a female officer of any rank, really, that should be available for them to do so.
The role of the response inspector is not recognised for the demands that it places on the individuals, because you've got a team to manage, you've got public expectation to manage, you've got the expectations of your senior command team to manage. All the time you're on the alert for looking for what can go wrong and making sure you're in a position to put the wheel back on when it starts to wobble. And I know that the young officers today, the response officers, carry far more work than ever I did when I was young in service. So if those numbers are going to be cut by 15 to 20%, then something's got to give. And one fears that will be the overall quality and effectiveness of the police service, which would lead to increased public dissatisfaction and some sort of alienation, and it's not a good situation.
I'm going to have my family life, and I'm going to have another child, and the one we've already got, and I'm still going to develop my career to the best of my ability, and I don't think it's fair at all that if people put restrictions on that to say, well, you have to work full-time.
Many of my colleagues are working at the limit of their capacity, and I think the fewer there are doing the same amount of work, the more you'll get officers burnt out, and the more that the standards of the policing and the quality of the policing service will reduce. I think that's the only way it can go.
I think it's getting a very political job, and we are being pulled from pillar to post as police officers, and we need to be very aware of exactly what our responsibilities are going to be in future, and that there are enough police officers to be able to take on the role to be able to do a proper job for the public.